Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore all aspects of ending relationships, separation, and parenting apart. If your marriage or partnership has ended, or you have friends and family who are separating, this podcast is for you. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. In each episode, we look at relationships and separation from different angles, including the emotional, legal, and social. I'm joined by experts and special guests who share their own unique stories, experience, and tips, with the goal of helping people end relationships in a kinder and better way. In this episode, I'm joined by Donald Stewart, Head of Training and Competence at Octopus Money, to discuss financial arrangements after divorce. We start off exploring why there are so many emotions attached to money during a divorce, the importance of seeking financial advice early on, and how to build financial confidence post-divorce. Many separating couples find it difficult to plan for their independent futures, and considering the practicalities of lifestyle adjustments and co-parenting arrangements, it can make financial discussions even more triggering. Donald explains the importance of understanding your assets, including pensions, which are so often overlooked, but are absolutely key to long-term financial stability. He finishes off describing what a money coach is and how they can help you prepare and plan for life post-divorce. You'll finish this episode feeling more confident about your finances, regardless of where you are in the separation process. If you loved this episode, then please subscribe and rate us on your preferred listening platform. Welcome, Donald.
Thank you very much. Hello, Kate.
It's lovely to have you. Thank you very much for joining today. Now, just in terms of a bit of context for the episode, we've sort of subtitled this podcast, All the Things I Wish I Knew About Money Before I Divorced. So we're going to have a bit of a dive into all the things people think about or should be thinking about when they get divorced, and how some advice from a money coach can help smooth that divorce process. So I'm really keen to dig into that. I thought I'd start with a little anecdote, which is a bit of a departure. But I can remember I've been divorced twice, but in my second divorce, the person I spoke to first, before I'd even articulated it to my friends and family, was my IFA. And I was absolutely terrified because I was a stay-at-home parent, having had a career, taken time off. I had 2 children under the age of 3. No money to call my own, and I absolutely was terrified, and I scuttled off to get some money advice very early on. But I'm not sure I was particularly typical of people, maybe a bit more paranoid than most, but certainly that feeling of, being really terrified, emotionally scared of what the financial outcome of all of this was going to be, was very pertinent in my mind. And so I thought I'd start by asking you, when typically do people come and seek money advice when they're getting divorced? Is it, like me, paranoid before? Is it during, or is it after the event?
It can vary, in all honesty. So I think, the first thing to say is that whole feeling of kind of being terrified, as you put it, being overwhelmed is very, very common when we see cases like this. So some people will be very much like you and will come in as soon as they're kind of thinking about the fact that divorce might be on the horizon and thinking about getting prepared, paranoid, as you put it, and making sure that they've got their ducks in a row before they enter into what could be a potentially kind of messy and stressful situation. Typically for us, it tends to be during or after the divorce has been finalized that we see most people. And in some ways, that's kind of understandable, because until you're actually going through the process, well, firstly, you might not know that it's about to happen. And quite often when we see people enter at the kind of during stage, it's come as a bit of a shock to them, or it's come as something completely, maybe not unexpected, but they didn't think it was going to happen right now. And so they're in the real kind of maelstrom of all the emotions, all the confusion. And much like you did, they just need somebody to help them get that sense of clarity and actually just have someone they can talk to and discuss things and move forwards with at least one element in terms of their finances and what we can help with. Then you get quite a few that are there from the kind of after divorce point of view. So they have already gone through, potentially they've got a settlement in place. Sometimes they're happy with it. Other times they're not so happy with it, but they accept it for what it is. And at that point, really, it's then helping with that kind of context of a fresh start. So now that you're here, what can you practically do with your money and what are the key things that you need to get in place so that you can start to move on with your life. Ideally, we would have more people joining when you did at the before stage so that we can help them find the right information and support to make sure that things are resolved fairly between them and make sure that they are well placed to then take those next steps when the time comes. So previously we couldn't actually support with anything to do with divorce settlements with an Octopus Money. And it's outside of the scope of our coaching service. But since we've worked with Amicable, we can obviously refer and work with you to help people all the way through that process. So from as soon as the conversations start all the way through to that end point and then into their new start, whatever that might look like.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I know, certainly from my own experience, I was out of the habit of dealing with money because I was the stay-at-home parent. And I suppose I'd lost quite a lot of confidence. And by going and talking to somebody early on, I think maybe it sort of slightly levels the playing field. Now, my ex-husband was obviously all into finances, and he was the kind of archetypal person who comes with a spreadsheet and a whole bunch of answers, which when you're not used to that is quite terrifying and overwhelming. So I really like this idea that, if you're going through this and you are in a position like I was, where you sort of just completely focused on different things by that point in your life, that you can go somewhere and talk to somebody about money in a relaxed way that isn't all spreadsheets and baffling ideas or anything like that. Because I guess you've got to meet people where they are. There must be a complete range of people with a complete range of different experiences of money and competence with it. So just talk about the way that the coaches connect with people.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in terms of that spectrum. So we have people who have never considered anything financial, really. They get paid, it goes into the joint account, and then it gets spent usually on bills, kids, all the normal things that you might expect money to be spent on. And then, as you say, all of a sudden, they've got decisions to make about what's the right home for my savings. What should I be doing with my pensions if I've even got one in the first place? What should I be doing in terms of day-to-day spending and budgeting? So you get that side of it. You get all the way up to the other side where, of course, we get people who were the financial expert in the relationship. And so actually they're really, really switched on with the numbers and the details. But for them, then there's perhaps a more of an emotional side of dealing with this and actually, how do I make those decisions on my own? So a key part of what we do at Octopus is basically being a completely judgment-free zone. So whatever that situation, our key is we're going to listen to you first and understand what's going on, what's on your mind, and crucially where you want to get to. And I think that first part around listening is really crucial because sometimes people just need to unload whatever it is and have that conversation to make it manageable. Because once it's out there, it's out there. On hypothetical paper, it's there. And you've said, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm worried about. And this is what I want to do next. And the way the coach would do that is to listen and let that person unburden. And then to just really ask them, well, actually, what's now done is done. But what are we looking at in terms of the future? What are the top 3 worries that you might have about money right now? And what's the support that you need for them? And then thinking a little bit more medium to long term, where do you want to get to with your money and your finances? What do you know? What are the gaps? And how do you feel about that? Because for some people, money in general can be massively overwhelming. The industry as a whole is notorious for lots of jargon, lots of technicality, and lots of stuff that gets kind of thrown at you. And when you're already in that storm of having either just gone through a divorce or you're in the process of going through a divorce, the last thing you need is more information overload. So really taking that time to just understand what's important to that client, understand where they're at, and not make any assumptions about what they should be doing or what we think is important, but listening to what's on their radar and what's the most important thing to them is the first bit. And then just helping them to take simple steps. So again, it could be very easy to say, well, look, we're the experts, so here's a solution straight off the bat. But if that person has no experience with finances, they're probably not going to make sense of it anyway. So it's really thinking about those small steps that person can take so that they can move forward and feel that they're moving forward, and then track that through, for example, completing actions with the coach so they know that they're making progress and that actually this is a new beginning. And while there's a lot of things still to resolve, or there might be, there is a way forward, and they're starting to take those initial steps on that way forward.
It sounds like you're kind of goal setting. You're asking them to paint a picture of what they want life to look like at the end of this kind of divorce process, if it's divorce or whatever it is. And then you're sort of working back and saying, right, well, now we've got the sort of destination. Let's not just try and get there in one step, but let's break it down into small steps of what we need to do next and what we need to do next. And I really like that, because we set goals when we're helping people go through a divorce process around what they want life to look like at the end of the divorce process. So it feels a very sort of symbiotic process then, that you're doing the same kind of thing, but at the level of money, where we're doing it at the level of life, maybe. So.
Yeah, a little bit of both. So I think you'll have more of a focus on life. We think about money in the context of life, really. So we think about, actually, yes, you've got these final destinations, and there will likely be more than one. So retirement tends to be a big one, and it might be funding kids through uni, or it might be massive holiday for the family now that you've got through, divorce proceedings, and you want to look at what you can afford, what you can't afford, and how you get there. And what we try and do is tailor it around a hierarchy of needs, very similar to Maslow, if you're familiar with that, in terms of the kind of security and everything else. So for someone who has never had that experience of finance, they might be on that first step of that pyramid we have. So they're thinking about everyday spending. So actually, budgeting and thinking about how to spend and save money efficiently doesn't necessarily seem like the most exciting thing in the world, but it's a really fundamental step for them to then move forward and have that holiday and have that retirement they want. So coaches will be looking at getting those building blocks in place and then taking people through that life journey, and ideally working with a client over a very long period of time, potentially the whole of their life, much like an advisor would, so that as they make that progress, or as life changes, perhaps new partners come in, all those kind of things, we can adjust that plan and help them to adjust their thinking to match where they're at that stage in life.
Well, just taking it back to the level of divorce then. So when you first sit down with someone going through a divorce, what are the first few things you ask them, and what do you look at in the initial phases?
So generally, we would treat someone going through a divorce in exactly the same way as we would treat anybody else. And that's very intentional, because we don't want people to think that actually all we're interested in is their divorce and what's going on now. We're interested in them as a person. And if divorce is a factor in that, then we can help and support them in that way. So typically, we would ask, what's made them actually seek out our help? What's made them want to engage with the coach so we can understand where they're at? And normally that's where divorce would surface, to say, hey, look, I'm going through this process, or I'm about to start this process, or I've just finished this process with the divorce. And then, it can vary so much as to, I'm just starting out, I don't know, or actually I want to make sure that I'm being treated fairly. And I want to make sure that I'm not going to lose out on things like the retirement I had planned with whatever might go on with this divorce. So that's typically what we would see there. We'd try and keep things quite client-led, so give them that space to think about actually how they feel right now, because divorce and separation generally can leave people quite vulnerable. And so their ability to, really engage with things and make the right decisions, we need to be mindful as a financial services business to make sure that they're in the right space to do that, and give them the space to have open conversations so we can understand what's really important to them and whether proceeding with us is the right thing or whether other support might be better. But we would ask how they're feeling about money, what their relationship with money is or was, and how that might have changed in the last few weeks and months, depending on the situation. And also we would think about where they want to be. So we would ask, thinking about the future, what would be your 3 most important financial goals? So we try and keep it to a limit of 3. 1, because a positive of separation and divorce is you do get that clean slate and that fresh start. So you might have things on your mind that you think, well, I never would have thought of that, but now I want to aim for X, Y, and Z. I want to take that holiday to Japan and Korea in a couple of years' time. And I want to go traveling around South America, whatever else I might do. And actually, I want to start my own business and retire at 60. All those kind of things might come out. So we're thinking about where do they want to get to? And then we're thinking and asking them around, what are the blockers to where they want to get to? And that's where we start to surface things like that dynamic of, actually, my former partner took care of all the money and I feel like I know nothing. Or actually, I've always looked after the finances, but now I'm a bit freaked out because it's just me and my money. And even quite commonly, if there's been a financial settlement, of course, there frequently is, if there's been a financial settlement, it could be that someone has a large amount of money and is a little bit frightened of what they might do with it, because there could be some real impactful things they could do towards their future, but they could go on a bit of a wild one and spend a lot of it as well. So sometimes like understanding where they are and what those fears are can really help us to keep them on track and use their money well, rather than just use it because it's there.
I think for most people, when they're divorcing, the biggest thing is they're adjusting to a dramatic downturn in lifestyle. There aren't many people who divorce where their actual financial kind of stability or their financial prowess increases. You're dividing a pot of money into two. So for usually both people in the couple, they're now looking at dealing with a different lifestyle and not having access to money in perhaps the way they did. So how do you go about helping people when they're feeling kind of very fearful about doing anything with money because suddenly it's much tighter than it used to be?
I think that leads back again to that step-by-step approach and that model of the pyramid we use is actually think about what you can do and think about what adds value or what stabilizes your life right now. So a starting point on those fundamentals might be, well, let's look at, now that you're in this new lifestyle, what money comes in, what money goes out, and thinking about what of that expenditure is absolutely essential that you can't change. So for example, if you've got your mortgage, you've got your rent, or you've got your council tax, there's nothing you can do about those. You've got to pay them for the most part and just kind of suck that one up. Then we think about the kind of variable spend. So the stuff that you need to spend, but you could potentially make some changes in. So a common example I use when training our coaches is if you've got someone who's struggling month to month and they're shopping at Waitrose, could they shop at Lidl or somewhere in between to make that kind of change in their spending habits to free up some more income? And then thinking about the discretionary spend, which is more commonly thought of as the fun stuff. So, going out, having a social life, all those kind of things. We'd never say stop those because you'll then have a miserable life. But thinking about how do you get enough of that so you're still having fun, you're still getting out and socializing and doing the things you enjoy, but you're still also having enough to cover the bills and build that first foundation to get you back on your feet and then move forward. And then it is really kind of a logical step-by-step process. So once that's in place, we then start thinking, well, emergency funds. So now, in most cases, you're reliant on you and you might have children reliant on you as well. So it's good to have that cash buffer that if something goes wrong, car breaks down, boiler blows up, loss of work, even things like that, then you've got something to fall back on to get things started. So it's really keeping it manageable and sensible and thinking about building in that logical fashion rather than just trying to go straight from point A to point Z and going, right, okay, you've got some money, let's invest it. It's thinking about getting those building blocks in first so that client feels safe and secure, so that they've got the headspace to make the right decisions when that time comes, but not rushing it through that process. And it's all backed up by planning software. So we can put their situation into our planning tool. We can show them visually, hey, look, actually, you might be really worried about your retirement and what that looks like. But based on what you've told us, here are the facts. Here's what you're potentially on track for with your overall pension pots. And here's what that could translate to as income. So where we can, we'll give that reassurance, but we'll keep it factual so that at the very least, somebody knows exactly where they stand and can see some steps forward as well.
It sounds like it's a really useful tool because, like you said at the very beginning of this, everything's thrown up in the air. It can be a fresh start and you need to kind of get a grip on what your fresh start looks like, don't you? And the income and outgoings thing, I think, is invaluable. One of the things I sort of struggled with at the beginning of my divorce was I never seemed to have an emergency fund. And I lived in fear of the kids breaking anything or anything breaking down. It literally, I can remember when the car went in the garage, literally having to sell the first shares I ever bought. And I had to sell these very last shares in order just to get it out of the garage because I'd taken it in without knowing how much it was going to cost and literally couldn't pay the bill when it came to it. I had to, it's such a soul destroying feeling, but maybe there would have been a better way had I sort of had a bit more kind of sort of guidance and expertise. So it's interesting to hear there's lots of help you can give people when they're changing lifestyles. But if you think back maybe just to that point where you might be helping people at the very beginning, or not even if you're helping, but you're giving some advice and tips to people, what are the things people should do in terms of, I don't know, let's call it money hygiene if you're going into a divorce? What should you be looking at?
It's a great question. And I think the first part of it is get the facts. So it can be quite difficult when you're thinking about, well, I think there's this pension here. And I'm sure I had that thing that I did with whatever company several years ago. And there's this thing and there's that thing for the kids. And is that in their name or my name? And all those kind of things. So the first starting point is get the facts, ideally on paper, and think about what are the assets, what are the liabilities. So for those that don't know, by assets, we're talking about properties, investments, savings, pensions, those kind of things, liabilities, loans, credit cards, debts. Then it's thinking about actually who owns or is responsible for those things. Is it something that is in both your joint names, or is it something that you own individually or your partner, soon to be former partner, owns individually? And just sometimes starting with that gives you the grounding to know exactly where you stand. And in many cases, actually helps you to realize it might not be as bad as you think it is. That's not to say always, because sometimes it can be a bit of an eye opener the other way, but it just gives you some comfort that you know what's definitely yours, what's potentially not, and what sits in the middle. And I always found, you mentioned my background in retail banking. So many people don't get, particularly with debt, that if your name is on it, you are jointly responsible for it. So it's not a case of, oh, we took it out for his or her car, so it's their problem. If your name is on it, potentially you're liable for a long time and a potentially big debt there. So it's really important to work out the ownership of what is what. The next step there would be thinking, actually, what do I want to get to? And you can break that down in stages. And we would encourage people to think short, medium, and long term. So in this case, short term is presumably going to be to get through that divorce proceeding and have that point A or new point A of where things are going to get started. And then thinking medium term. Once I've got the divorce settled and I've started afresh as me on my own or whatever that situation might be, where do I want to go to next? And then thinking longer term, ideally, where would I want to be at the longer term, for example, retirement? So again, just breaking it down into manageable steps. And I'd also encourage people not to be too hard on yourself, because actually, although we encourage that short, medium, long term, if all you can think about right now is the short term, that's fine, because that's your big priority. And then, our objective would be, well, how do we support you in getting to the short term and to the end of that process? And then we can revisit and go from there. But it can help to have that framing so that you've got a plan of sorts to follow, which we could firm up into a proper plan if someone works with us. But you've got a plan to follow. You've got a route you want to go to. Now, it doesn't mean that journey through that route is going to go like this, because there's invariably going to be some ups and downs on the way. But actually, where are the points I want to aim for? And what can I do right now? What can be the main focuses that I need to think about? Particularly then, if you've got those facts about assets and liabilities, you can start thinking, well, am I in the position I think I want to be, or is there some work that I need to do to stabilize things before we go any further?
And that's good advice, because certainly in terms of getting divorced, when you get divorced, you have a financial order or a consent order that sets out, what you're going to do with your assets, your debts, and all of that kind of thing. And it'll say what's happening to properties or savings and who's keeping them and whether or not there's going to be a pension share. And to do that, you have to do a full financial disclosure. So that work you're doing to find out the values and to find out who owns them, that's all great prep work for the eventual disclosure you're going to have to do as part of the process of getting divorced and sorting out money and assets and things. So it is a real eye-opener, as you say, because legally from a divorce and separation perspective, anything that's a marital asset is jointly owned, irrespective of whose name it's in. So even if you've been married for a long time and the house is just in your name and only you were on the deeds and only you were on the mortgage, it's still a marital asset. So it's still in the pot for division. So I think understanding, as you've said, what the ownership is technically, so who owns what, whose name is on it, and then understanding where that might differ in terms of what's a marital asset and what's not is really key and important. But coming with all of those figures, and that's quite a big job, isn't it? I know people find it daunting. I found it daunting at the time as well. But when you're scrabbling around trying to find a pension you had when you were 22 in your first job or whatever, it's hard, isn't it? So is there anywhere people can get that information from? Can you help in that respect?
The best thing that people can do, I'm going to sound like my own father now, so I'm sure he'd be very proud of this if he ever hears this. But effectively is keep records. It sounds really boring, but as a preemptive thing, if you're hopefully not in this position just yet, keep records. And even if you never look at them, you know that they're there. So if I were to go downstairs and think, right, what do I own? What does my future wife own in terms of our assets? I know that it's all in a box, in a little black box, and we've got it joint sole, and everything kind of in between is all in a separate box. So both of us can access that and go, right, this is what the situation is, and things are nice and clear. If you haven't been as well organized or sad as me in that respect, then what you could do is you've got pension tracing services available through the government. So you can go on the gov.uk website. They can help you to trace your pensions there. We have services available through Octopus Money. If you work with us as a coach, we can help you in terms of finding that link and finding the information that you require. Go to places like Citizens Advice Bureau and see what you can find out and what you need to know and what you might be eligible for as well. One thing that a lot of people miss is actually they've been maybe the stay-at-home parent, for example, and they don't know what they're entitled to now. So think about that for getting information about what you're entitled to. State pension is a key one as well. And there's a particular disparity here between men and women. And that is that particularly with, as things stand right now, with women, if they've had a large period out of work, and they've not been paying national insurance contributions or claiming benefits and therefore having national insurance contributions paid for them, then the full state pension entitlement might not be there. So there might be actions there, but you can check again on the Gov.uk website to see whether your national insurance record is up to date and whether there's anything to do about it from there. You could also speak to your employer. So some employers will have like a good archive of previous workplace benefits they've offered and whether you signed up to them or not. A lot of people sign up to those kind of things and have them, but it's not really the forefront of your mind generally in life, but particularly when you've got so much other stuff going on. So worth having a look at what your employer offers, what you're signed up to, and what you might have available in terms of things like protection insurance, so life cover, critical illness, those kind of things. Anything else you might have in terms of your pension that you weren't aware of, any benefits that come with that. They're all good places to start.
Yeah. And on that point as well, it's really interesting because things like life assurance, when you stop being somebody's spouse, might stop. Medical insurance and those things that you've been used to might stop. And all of that needs to be factored into a divorce settlement as well. So being clear on what benefits you have and haven't got, as well as the actual financial, because some of them come free, don't they? And you sort of don't think that you need to record them as money things, but they are money things. They do have a benefit and they are significant when it comes to working out a fair settlement. So all of that's worth making sure you've got that knowledge at your fingertips and that information.
I think a really easy one to do as well, which is probably the most straightforward starting point if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed trying to work out where it is, but go on your banking app, look at your direct debits and standing orders. Because if there's a direct debit or a standing order, you're paying for or contributing to something. So if you go on that, it can make it really easy. Typically a direct debit, for example, if I was looking at my income protection insurance, the reference number is the policy number. So if you can find information like that, you can say, well, it's that company, it's that policy number. I can phone up and have that conversation and see what it's all about, what I've got, what I haven't. So that can be a nice kind of step one to get you going before you dive into the paperwork like I would.
And then you can also spot all those apps you've accidentally subscribed to and forgotten to unsubscribe to, and they're just rolling over forevermore as well, can't you? So you can always make some savings as you go.
Absolutely.
So you've done a really good job of explaining, what the benefit of coming pre-divorce is. You've talked a little bit about the sorts of things like the cash flow assessments that you can do when people are in the middle of it. What other things can you do either when people are divorcing or post-divorce? What gets missed that you really can add some value to?
I think the biggest thing that gets missed is pensions. And there's probably several reasons for that. One is that pensions are still kind of just forgotten about. Everyone knows the concept. Everyone's got one that they've been auto-enrolled into, or most people, I should say, have got one they've been auto-enrolled into, and it comes out of our salary and whatever else, and it sits there, and we don't really think about it. And just actually educating people on the importance of pensions and saving now and thinking, hey, I know that you might be in survival mode in terms of just getting to that kind of starting point, but here's something bigger picture to think about in a structured and step-by-step way. Here's something to think about that you might want to get on your agenda for maybe the next point after you've got that stability in place. So that educational piece and filling the blanks for what people don't know. Yep, we've got a plan and we can tell you what that means in terms of your future aspirations. Yes, we can help you with investing, with pensions and all that kind of stuff in terms of actually doing those. So putting money into investments, putting money into pensions, but just helping people to fill those gaps of what they don't know is really, really powerful. Pensions would be number one. Absolutely number one. I think, and this would be more in your world. So if someone was to then go on to have a conversation with Amicable, but I think with us, people just assume, as you highlighted earlier, that everything they own is theirs and everything that they own jointly is 50-50. And the house, they'll just sell it and that's fine. And the other one will just take on the mortgage and it's nice and straightforward. And sadly, it's not always like that. So there can be a lot more nuance. So again, just kind of being real and being realistic and just laying that groundwork to say, first and foremost, pensions, particularly for women, but then thinking about actually being prepared that it's not necessarily as simple as lying down the middle and one thing goes to you, one thing goes to the other.
I think pensions is a really interesting one, isn't it? Because I don't think the name, because we call them personal pensions, so that doesn't help. But pensions, like any marital asset, are in the pot for dividing. The starting point in any pot is a 50-50 division of assets, which means you add up your pension, you add up the other person's pension, you divide by 2, and then you have a pension share to equalize pensions. That's the very crude way of looking at it. But there is a whole bunch of kind of metrics around whether or not that's a fair way to do it. What can be a better way of doing it is looking at what income you'll get from the pension. So looking at equal income in retirement, rather than just dividing the CETVs, the cash equivalent transfer values of pensions, and making sure you've got the same cash equivalent transfer value, because that can lead to very different incomes ultimately, can't it? So there's a level of sophistication here. The biggest point to get across, as you have rightly said, is that pensions are in the pot for dividing. Then how you divide them is the secondary part of that. And the nearer you are to retirement when you divorce, the more important understanding that those subsequent layers, not just that the pension needs dividing, but how it gets divided and on what value it gets divided, becomes super critical. Because we find a lot of value is left on the table when people divorce and they don't take into account the pension. And the really common thing is wife takes house, husband takes his pension. And although it looks on paper like, that's a roughly equal split, it often works out very disadvantageously to the wife. And we've got a whole generation of women who are going to be very poor in retirement because of some of these decisions that have been made that feel very fair in the here and now. But when you model them with some of the software you were talking about earlier, they don't pan out fairly. They don't look as fair as they look in the immediate right here and right now. And I think we really need to get that message across that you should be looking at this on a more sophisticated level than just a quick on the back of a fag packet rule of thumb. That looks fair. Let's, you own that, I own that. Let's just split the house kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's really important that people have that understanding of what fair is, because again, I think it's human nature. We like to just get things done. So an offer's put in front of us, it seems perfectly reasonable. So we go, great, fine, thank you, let's just get it done. And it's done. But you don't see that long-term picture. And you don't see actually what am I giving up or what am I missing out on? And, depending on that person's experience of divorce and separation before, particularly their first time, they have no clue. And, aside from yourselves, there's very few resources there that will help them to understand what fair looks like and what they should be aiming for and thinking about in that process.
And like you say, it's because pensions are a bit out of sight, out of mind in this kind of culture we live in at the moment, and everything's here and now, here and now. People aren't thinking about them on a day-to-day basis. So when something like divorce happens, they stay in that same never, never category, don't they? And we don't ever get to the point of actually thinking, well, there's a big gap here from when your child maintenance stops and your pension kicks in that you cannot possibly bridge, and you might be sitting in a very nice big house, but it's not going to help you pay the bills. And we have to look at some of this and think in a bit more detail. Are there any other things you think people miss as part of a money conversation around divorce?
I think the people who are then going to go into a situation where they're single, it is that understanding of different allowances and things they might be entitled to. So it feels very much like, you've had this lifestyle, as you mentioned earlier, and then that's gone. And you've got to get by on whatever your income currently is. But there's things out there, even things like the council tax breaks. They're not huge, but they are an important thing for people who are single, and the potential uplift in some benefits and allowances that come with that as well. People don't know about these things because I would assume that most of the time when people get married, they aren't thinking about what if it goes wrong, and what if I am on my own? What do I do to survive there? So again, that's where organizations like Sisters Advice Bureau, even speaking with some of our coaches, we can highlight, actually, these are some things that you could be entitled to, or some allowances that you could take advantage to, that aren't necessarily going to restore the same standard of living, but are going to make things more manageable for you and make things a little bit better than you might have thought they were.
I like the idea of having a coach post-divorce, because you are adjusting to a completely new life. You're getting used to new income, outgoings. You're probably living in a new property. You've got to work all of that stuff out, and having someone to walk you through some of that. But also it's not just getting used to the day to day. It's all of a sudden planning for a solo future, isn't it? Because you might meet somebody, but you don't know. You might well have a prenup if you meet somebody a second time around. You never know, do you? So just planning to know that you have made that plan for yourself for retirement and later life feels really important. It feels like a weight is lifted when you get involved and get your head into that conversation of money. And I think it sounds like it's nicer, it's better, it's more supported if you're doing it with a coach.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the feedback we get from clients in that situation, one of the first things they'll say was, it was great to get that off my chest.
Yeah.
It was brilliant to talk to someone not involved, and someone who listened to me, didn't judge, and just listened to what I had to say and seemed to really care about me. And I would say that about our coaches. They're a lovely bunch. So they are genuinely passionate about the people they speak to, and they genuinely want to help. So just that unburdening of, I've got all this stuff going on. Fine. Tell us about that. Unburden yourself. And then we can think about, well, that's done. What do we do now moving forward? And one of my biggest fears coming on this podcast was sometimes what we do as coaches and octopus can seem really, really simple and really basic. And to some extent it is, but that's why it's really powerful and impactful, because we're not trying to blind people with science. We're just interested in understanding what's on that person's plate and thinking about how we can help them to manage it and manage it fairly.
Well, what I love about it is it feels like you've got somebody walking alongside you at one of life's key moments, haven't you? So, there are some key moments in life, whether it's when you get married or when you graduate, even get married, have kids, divorce, plan for dying, all of that kind of stuff. They're real moments in life, aren't they, where you've got to make some big decisions. So having somebody walk alongside you in that moment, not tell you what to do, not, as you say, bamboozle you with spreadsheets or lots of different products that they want to flog at you, but just to listen to what's important to you as a human and as a person, and to understand your life journey, and then to offer some support around that. It feels brilliant. And it's the mark of a good service when it feels very simple, but you know yourself that doing anything that feels very simple is there's a lot of work behind it to make that customer experience feel so simple.
Well, this is it. I'm training a group at the moment, and they're 3 weeks in. So there's so much to learn, and it's so complex. And some of them are now getting to the point where actually it is really simple. It's just about listening and having a conversation, being human, and then, show that way forward. I thought it was really interesting you said about, not telling people what to do, because that's often a little bit of a barrier for people to come and get help, is they think they're going to go and speak to someone like a financial advisor or like a money coach from other providers. And they think that they're basically going to be told, oh, well, you've done this, and this terribly wrong. You're awful with money and budgeting. Here's what you should do. And here's why I'm right. And we are the complete opposite of that. So it's really thinking about actually just getting it down on paper and saying, right, what do you know? What don't you know? Or don't you know yet? What can you do? What can you handle? And what can't you handle just yet? And then thinking about explaining those options and highlighting the potential routes that person could take so that they can make that right choice for them, rather than it just being a lecture.
And I, from speaking to your coaches myself, I know that what's really lovely about it is just the sense of people understanding your journey and your relationship with money. And who knew I had a relationship with money till I started to talk to you guys? I mean, I didn't know. I certainly couldn't have put it into words, but it's just understanding that is actually, it's so empowering. It just gives you such a new found sense of confidence and everything else. And it is hard as a single parent or somebody who's got limited headspace because they're in the midst of a divorce to find the time and the bandwidth to do this stuff. But I can only say from my experience, it actually unblocks more than you can possibly imagine. And I found it a really, interesting process. Tell us just how can people get a taster session or understand what happens with a money coach?
Absolutely. So everybody is entitled to a free, we call it a starter session. So to get a taste of what we do and understand what Octopus Money is all about. So you can go to our website and you can book in directly with a coach. So you can see all of the available coaches we have. You can read a bit about them to make sure you're comfortable with them. You can click on their booking link and you can book straight in with them. Or if you fancy, you can just book with the next available coach and see who you end up with. They're all great. They're all lovely. So you'll get a great service, whoever you go to, but you can be more selective if you wish. We're quite often, quite increasingly often available as workplace benefits. So if someone is thinking about speaking with a money coach, again, as I mentioned earlier, check your workplace benefits because it might be we're an option there. Some employers will fully fund that for their staff. Some will fund half of it and some will just have it as a benefit available that the individual pays for, but it could well be that we're available as one of your workplace benefits. So those are the two places that you can start with, and then your first session with us is always free. So it's about you understanding what we do and how we can support you, and us understanding what's important to you right now, where you're at in that particular journey, and how you're feeling and what you're trying to work towards, and then making that decision as to whether now is the right time to come and work with us, or whether you need to get to that point, perhaps have a conversation with Amicable or others to get your divorce finalized and then come back to us when you're ready. But it's completely judgment free. I'd recommend it to anyone just to find out more about what we do. And, like we say, even just to unburden yourself of all those worries that might be there about pensions, budgeting and everything else, and then see where you go from there with no pressure.
And we'll put all of those links in the show notes as well. So if anyone's listening and they want to have a taster session, then they can. And if you're an Amicable customer, you can find the link through your Amicable dashboard too. So lots of ways to get in touch. It's been brilliant talking to you today, Donald. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and advice around money and divorce. It's been great chatting. That is all we have time for today. Now, where can people find out more about you if they want to contact you about any of this stuff?
Oh, absolutely. So they can find me on LinkedIn. So I'm under Donald Martin Stewart. My middle name's in there just to distinguish me. So you can find me easily. I look a lot like this, but in a black jumper. So you can see it's me. So you can reach me there. Anyone is more than welcome to email me as well if they want to message me directly. So that's donald.stewart@octopusmoney.com. I'd be happy to have a conversation if people would like to.
Brilliant. Thank you. And if you're looking for advice on divorce, separation, or co-parenting, you can visit amicable.co.uk, where you can explore all our free resources, or you can book a free advice consultation as well. You can also find me on LinkedIn, and you can find all about new podcast episodes by subscribing for updates and visiting thedivorcepodcast.com. Or, of course, you can download us from your favorite listening platforms too. And finally, we'd love to know what you thought about this episode, and also any questions or tips or things you'd like to share with us. Please contact us at hello@amicable.co.uk. And you never know, your questions or ideas might find their way into the very next podcast. So thank you in advance. Thanks, Donald. It's been great chatting to you. And thank you, everybody, for listening.